Chapter 667. Leonard was startled by the sight of Wilbur leaving so soon. "Are you going just like that, sir? I've got other things to do. I have to get going now," said Wilbur with a smile. Leonard asked weakly, "Can't you stay a few more days so I can repay you for what you've done?" "Oh, that's all right. I'm pretty sure we'll have the chance to see each other again." Leonard was a bit of a drama king and a pervert, but he did not have a bad heart. Rich people like him were honestly pretty rare nowadays, and Wilbur did not have any ill feelings toward the guy. Leonard let out a long sigh and said helplessly, "I'll send you back then, sir." "You don't have to. I'll just take the bullet train. It's faster that way. Besides, you've got far more important things to do here." Wilbur patted Leonard on the shoulder, turned around, and took off. Leonard blinked dumbly, still slightly confused. It was only after Wilbur had disappeared from the crowd's line of sight that they returned to their senses. Everything that happened tonight had been unforgettable, and they would remember it for the rest of their lives. Just then, a car drove out and set off after Wilbur. Leonard turned around and saw that Catelyn had disappeared. Just then, John said all of a sudden, "Ladies and gentlemen, I say we elect Mr. Leonard Thatcher as our new chairman. What do you think?" Everyone else nodded in agreement. Leonard blinked in a daze for some time before understanding what Wilbur's words earlier had meant. "Thank you, sir." Leonard stared after the direction Wilbur had left in, sinking into a deep bow. Just then, Catelyn's car finally managed to catch up with Wilbur. She slowed to a stop in front of him. "Sir, can I give you a ride to the station?" "Oh, you don't have to," Wilbur said, surprised. Catelyn bit her lip. She said nothing but did not leave either. Wilbur let out a sigh, opened the car door, and got in. Catelyn scrambled to drive, heading for the train station. Neither of them spoke the entire way, until after Wilbur got out of the car and entered the station. Catelyn let out a long sigh, her expression unreadable. She was already lucky enough to be able to give Wilbur a ride. What more could she ask for? Catelyn smiled bitterly, driving back in silence. Wilbur got on the bullet train, sitting by the window and watching the view quietly. This trip had been greatly rewarding, more than anything he could have imagined. He had a new understanding of the world, but the more he knew, the more foolish he felt. Everything about the universe was so mysterious and hard to understand. How humans came to be, if not for the existence of the gods, could human beings become gods themselves if they worked hard enough? All of that was still a mystery to him. Just then, a loud thump could be heard as a heavy item was tossed onto the seat next to Wilbur, snapping him out of his thoughts. He looked over to see a tall, broad man sitting down next to him. The man glared at Wilbur and asked, "The hell are you looking at?" Wilbur turned back around, not wanting to argue with him in the slightest. His action only served to anger the man further, thinking that Wilbur was ignoring him. "What the fuck? You turn around and face me, right now." "What are you doing?" Wilbur looked back over with a frown. The man clenched his fists, rippling the muscles on his arms. "I'm going to give you the chance to apologize to me right now, or you're going to get it," the man said coldly. Chapter 668. Wilbur did not know what to say. Was bullying allowed just because people were bigger in size? Yet Wilbur was far too engrossed in his thoughts to be wasting his time with this man. He muttered an apology and turned back to face the window. The man sneered smugly, finally dropping the case. A while later, Wilbur received a message from Shelby, inviting him to lunch the next day. Wilbur could not say no to a request from his friend's sister, so he agreed to the lunch invitation. Despite this, the thought of Whitney made him scowl. The train arrived at Seachertown eventually, and the man next to Wilbur got up to leave with his suitcase. He sneered at Wilbur one last time before swaggering off. Wilbur shook his head, getting off the train himself. He left the station and called himself a taxi to return to Sea Lake Island. It was late at night then, and Wilbur entered his demiplane as soon as he returned to his room. The flame serpent slithered over excitedly but was kicked to the side by Wilbur as he picked the crystal bone. This looked like it had been part of a giant's body. Whatever that giant was, it had to be immensely powerful when it was still alive. Far more powerful than a sanctuary-level cultivator in modern times. The universe was truly mysterious, God knows what had happened during the period of this planet's existence. In comparison to that, several decades of a human's life was nothing in comparison to the duration of the world's existence. It would be impossible for someone to understand just what had happened through several billion years in just the span of a few decades, or even a few centuries. Wilbur pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the crystal bone for now. A while later, he offered it without hesitation. Absorbing the energy of the crystal bone would help him improve his powers for sure. In comparison to what he might get from the dragon's altar in exchange, however, Wilbur would pick the latter. The altar lit up with pale flames, and the crystal bone was converted into grace points at once. The golden hourglass appeared, showing 1,130 grace points. Wilbur smiled in satisfaction. The last crystal bone had gotten him 1,200 grace points, and it was clear that Bruce had used up a little of its energy to explain the drop in points. Yet even after Bruce had used the crystal bone to grow his power beyond anything he had ever achieved, he had only used up so little of it. It was clear that the crystal bone held a terrifying amount of energy. Just then, the screen lit up with a long list of options. The first option shone as bright as ever. Second consciousness. What's that supposed to be? Wilbur took a closer look and reacted in shock not long after. This power would give the cultivator a second consciousness, giving them 10 times the ability to think and analyze. This second consciousness would quite literally have a mind of its own and grow in its skills and power along with the host, as well as sharing whatever information it had gained. Wilbur gasped after reading the description. This power would pretty much give him an extra brain, one that could be improved endlessly. The possibilities were endless. Now that he had advanced to a new stage, there was a lot of new information in his consciousness that he could not figure out. If he obtained this new brain, he would have his work cut in half by using it to decipher that information. It would save him both time and effort. The thought made Wilbur feel all the more wary of this old dragon. It seemed to know exactly what he needed at the right time, which meant that it was reading Wilbur like an open book. Wilbur sighed at the thought. The more he learned about this world, the more insignificant he felt.